On the night when I had a miscarriage, Marcos was with his first love. The next day, his first love said to me arrogantly, "I've had enough fun outside. It's time to give me back the position of Mrs. Marcos. Take it. I think it's dirty." However, later, Marcos knelt on the ground and begged me not to leave him. 01 It was as if there had been a premonition. Marcos said that he had a social engagement that night and wouldn't be having dinner at home. I insisted that he come back to accompany me, saying that I had cooked his favorite boiled sliced pork. "Amaya, you haven't been so tactless before." There was a bit of impatience in his tone. Yes, I had always been very obedient in front of him. I was from a remote small town and got admitted to a prestigious university. I was what others called a small-town swot in their eyes, and Marcos was the so-called favored son of heaven, with good grades, good looks, and a good family background. When he was a freshman in college, he gave a speech on stage as the representative of the freshmen. The sunlight shone on his fine and soft hair, and he was like a little sun, shining with a dazzling light. For the first time, I felt a strong affection for him. I knew that the gap between us was huge. The confidence I had in my studies was worthless in front of truly outstanding people. In front of him, I was inferior, cowardly, and she was so cautious that she didn't dare to reveal her feelings for him. However, during a club dinner, drunk me and drunk him went back to school together. He gentlemanly sent me to the downstairs of my dormitory and asked me, "Amaya, do you want to be my girlfriend?" Yes. Despite the fact that no one was optimistic about our relationship, we dated for 4 years. And when everyone thought that we would break up after graduation, Marcos proposed to me. Only, the day before he proposed, his first love Shirley went abroad. Actually, I knew that Marcos didn't love me that much, and I also knew about Shirley's existence. No matter when, as long as she made a phone call, Marcos would immediately appear in front of her. But Shirley said that she didn't love Marcos and that she only regarded Marcos as her brother, so I always deceived myself into telling myself that one day Marcos would forget Shirley. After 3 years of marriage, Marcos did do everything a husband should do. He worked hard, earned money to support the family, never indulged in a dissipated life, would report his social engagements to me, and didn't have complicated relationships with other men or women. Even my family members said that I was so lucky to have met Marcos and always reminded me to hold on to him tightly. "Approximately what time will you be back tonight?" I compromised and asked him. "I don't know. Go to bed early by yourself. Don't worry about me." That night, I didn't sleep well. It started to rain outside, pattering softly. After 12 o'clock at night, I was awakened by the pain in my abdomen. When I turned on the light, I was shocked to see the blood on the bed. I had been pregnant for 3 months. I tremblingly dialed Marcos's number with my hands. It was very noisy on the other end of the phone. "Didn't I tell you not to wait for me? Marcos, I suddenly bled a lot down there." Before I could finish my words, suddenly, a clear female voice came from the other side. "Sister-in-law, I'm Shirley. Don't urge Marcos to go home. A few of our childhood friends are getting together. Don't worry. I'll make sure he's okay." My hand holding the mobile phone was shaking constantly. I didn't know whether it was because of fear, anger, or sadness. I said in a heavy tone, "Give the mobile phone to Marcos." "Marcos, Amaya seems angry. Explain it to her." Shirley's voice grew farther and farther away. Then came Marcos's extremely cold voice, "Wait until I come back if there's anything." "Marcos?" He hung up the phone mercilessly. When I dialed again, he kept hanging up on me, and finally, he just turned off his phone directly. 02 I endured the pain in my body and mind and sent a WeChat message to Shirley. "Please tell Marcos that I'm having severe pain in my abdomen and bleeding a lot down there. Ask him to come back and take me to the hospital." This WeChat message had an effect as expected. 2 minutes later, Marcos called me back, with anger in his tone. "Enough, Amaya. Stop doing such disgusting things. Shirley and I are just having a simple dinner." "I'm really? If you want to go to the hospital, go by yourself." Marcos didn't listen to my explanation. After dropping this sentence, he hung up the phone again. This time, I finally gave up hope. It was as if I suddenly saw the reality clearly and suddenly understood that Marcos didn't love me. It wasn't that he didn't love me enough, but that he didn't love me at all. I covered my abdomen and drove myself to the hospital in the heavy rain, covered in blood. As expected, I lost the baby. Lying on the cold operating table, I signed the operation consent form by myself. From beginning to end, I was alone. It wasn't until the next afternoon that Marcos came to the hospital, with Shirley following him. I saw a trace of guilt in his eyes. Perhaps he hadn't expected that I had really had a miscarriage. He thought I was lying to him, lying to make him leave Shirley's side, but he forgot that I was so gentle and obedient. Countless times when he left me to see Shirley, I had never stopped him once. "Sister-in-law, I'm sorry." Shirley spoke first before Marcos did, and suddenly her eyes were red from crying. "I didn't expect that you really." "I'm sorry. If it weren't for me coming back to China and Marcos giving me a welcome party and we got drunk again, this wouldn't have happened. It's not your fault. Marcos comforted Shirley. Having a child also depends on fate. That meant that the loss of my child with him was a natural miscarriage and had nothing to do with anyone else. I didn't give any explanation. I didn't tell him that the doctor said there might have been hope if I had come earlier. Forget it. It didn't matter anymore. At this time, Marcos's mother Ariella came to the ward and asked me loudly in a fury, "What's going on? Why did the child disappear?" "Mom, keep your voice down," Marcos reminded her beside her. Perhaps she saw my face that was as pale as a piece of white paper at the moment. "I can't keep my voice down. I've told you many times that you're so thin and you should be especially careful when you're pregnant. I told you to eat more but you just wouldn't listen. Now that the child is gone, are you happy?" Ariella scolded me. She didn't even ask about the reason. "Mom, I didn't agree when you and Amaya got married in the first place. You're from a humble family. How could you be worthy of him? Now you can't even keep a child. You're really useless." Ariella became more and more angry and pointed at my nose and cursed. Ariella looked down on me and had always disagreed with my marriage to Marcos, but she couldn't resist Marcos's determination. She and Marcos's father had divorced long ago. She was afraid of really offending Marcos and having no one to rely on when she was old. After getting married, she often gave me dirty looks and ridiculed me. Fortunately, Marcos often spoke up for me. When Ariella wanted to move in and live with us, Marcos firmly refused. Many little things made me think that Marcos still had feelings for me, just like now. In order to avoid the conflict between me and Ariella, he took Ariella out of the ward. Then suddenly, it was just Shirley and me left. Shirley had a delicate face with fair skin and exquisite facial features. She was also very good at dressing up. When we first entered college, I would even be embarrassed to put on lipstick while she already knew how to wear high heels and spaghetti straps and could put on thick and bright makeup. In fact, I hadn't seen her many times. In my impression, whenever she came to our school to play with Marcos, Marcos would put aside everything to accompany her. Several years had passed, and Shirley seemed to have hardly changed at all. She was just as beautiful as before, forming a sharp contrast with me on the hospital bed at the moment. Last night, both Marcos and I were drunk. Otherwise, we wouldn't have slept in so late. Don't misunderstand. Although we were under the same roof, we didn't do anything. Shirley took the initiative to speak. I chuckled. "The fact that you said it out means you want me to misunderstand, doesn't it?" A flash of astonishment crossed her face for a second and then she showed a calm smile. "So you're not stupid after all. I was just used to deceiving myself. Since that's the case, then I'll make it clear." Shirley said arrogantly, "I've had enough fun outside these years. It's time for me to take back the position of Mrs. Marcos." I laughed. I was really amused by her. Shirley's face turned a bit ugly when she saw my expression. She probably also saw the sarcasm in my eyes. "Didn't you say that you only regarded Marcos as your brother?" I didn't expect that Miss Shirley had an incestuous preference. "I'm not asking for your opinion. I'm just informing you." Shirley's face was gloomy. "Take it. I think it's dirty," I said indifferently. Shirley probably didn't expect that I would be so calm. In everyone's mind, I loved Marcos deeply and would never leave him even if I died. She examined me and said slowly, "I really didn't think of competing with you for Marcos before. He wasn't my type. But after having fun around, I found that Marcos is still the best, at least he's the best to me. I've never settled for less. When choosing a man, of course, I'll choose the most outstanding one." I just smiled faintly and didn't respond to her. Marcos walked into the ward from outside. The smile on Shirley's face immediately became innocent and harmless. She naturally took Marcos's arm and asked in a soft voice, "Has Auntie gone back?" I asked her to go back first. Marcos nodded. "Auntie must be very sad," Shirley said sadly. "But it doesn't matter. You and sister-in-law are still young. You can still have children." Marcos seemed to glance at Shirley but didn't say anything. He turned around and looked at me. "I just asked the doctor. You can be discharged from the hospital." He was obviously cold towards me. I thought I would be very sad, just like every time before when I saw his hurried back as he rushed to Shirley. The pain was like a sharp stab in my heart. However, at this moment, I was surprisingly calm. I followed Marcos home. Before going home, Marcos sent Shirley off first. After arriving home, Marcos rarely poured me a cup of warm boiled water. "When you called me last night, I had already drunk a lot of wine. So even if I rushed back, I wouldn't have been able to drive you to the hospital. This child and we just didn't have the fate." Was this an explanation? Or was there a trace of guilt in his heart, so he found a reason to make himself feel at ease? 04, did you ever think that I needed someone to accompany me? I asked him. Marcos was slightly stunned. Last night when I was desperately looking for him, was it really just to ask him to come back and take me to the hospital? I wasn't in a situation where I couldn't drive by myself last night. I even knew very clearly that driving by myself would be faster than calling an ambulance. I just wanted him to accompany me. I'm also a human being. When facing sudden danger, I would also have an instinctive fear. I hope that I could have someone to rely on. Perhaps. It's not that the child and we didn't have the fate, but that there's no fate between us. I said quietly. Then I watched the subtle changes in Marcos's expression. After a long while, he just said, "You should have a good rest." He didn't explain himself any further or respond to what I had just said. To him, I was so easy to dismiss. Anyway, I wouldn't really argue with him. We had been together for so many years, and every time we had a quarrel or a small conflict, I was the one who digested it by myself in the end. It would be the same this time. I still lived with him. The matter of the miscarriage was never mentioned again, and neither did anyone mention divorce. We lived under the same roof, and the distance between us grew farther and farther invisibly as time passed. Marcos came home later and later, and occasionally he didn't even come back for a whole night. At first, I would still symbolically make a phone call or send a message. But after he ignored me in the end, I stopped disturbing him. I did what I should do. For example, collecting evidence. For example, calculating the family property. For example, starting to look for a job for myself. After graduating from college, Marcos inherited a small company from his mother and then expanded the business territory with all the employees. Strictly speaking, Marcos was a workaholic. Except for Shirley, nothing else could affect his work. So in the 3 years of starting the business, the assets of the company doubled, and he had always been the pride in Ariella's mouth. As for me, I gave up the opportunity to be recommended for postgraduate study and entered Marcos's company to work hard with him on the career. Until last year when the company was completely on the right track, Ariella urged us to have a child, and Marcos suggested that I stay at home full-time. I thought that anyway, when we had a child in the future, someone had to take care of it, and that person must be me, so I gave up my job and adapted to the rhythm of full-time life in advance. I prepared my resume and sent it out, and then made dinner for myself. Without Marcos having dinner at home, I could do whatever I wanted. After all, Marcos was very picky. I had to cook different dishes for him every day. Suddenly, the door was opened. I didn't know how long it had been since Marcos hadn't come home before 7 o'clock. Obviously, there was only my dinner on the dining table. Marcos also noticed it. He said, "I'm not back for dinner." Actually, I had guessed it too. There had long been an unspoken understanding between us. "Shirley has agreed to be with me," Marcos said, very calmly. As if it was a matter of course. The marriage between him and me was just a formality and had no restraint on him. "Should I congratulate you?" I continued to eat my simple but delicate dinner. "There's no need for you to be sarcastic in front of me. When we were together, you knew that the person I liked had always been Shirley. You should have been prepared for this day long ago." 057 years of feelings were just exchanged for the sentence that I should have been prepared long ago. After all, I put down my chopsticks and couldn't eat any more. I said, "It was you who said you wanted to date me and marry me. Dating you was just to stimulate Shirley, and so was marrying you." Marcos laid his cards on the table directly. "So many people liked you. Why me?" "Because you were the most obedient. For this reason, I really could give it full marks." "So what?" "Let's go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get divorced tomorrow." "Sorry to disappoint you." I said to Marcos word by word, "I don't plan to listen to you this time." "What do you mean?" Marcos's face visibly turned ugly. "I won't get divorced. I don't love you at all. There's no point in you pestering me like this. You also said that in these 7 years, I've always known that you liked Shirley. Amaya, is it interesting? I don't love you at all. There's no point in you pestering me like this. You also said that in these 7 years, I've always known that you liked Shirley. So it doesn't matter whether you love me or not. As long as I love you, that's enough." I tried my best to put on a nice smile, even though I felt it was hypocritical myself. But did it matter? What mattered was achieving my goal. "You'll make me dislike you," Marcos said coldly. "Compared with that, I'm more afraid of losing you. I really didn't expect that you could degrade yourself to such an extent." Marcos dropped this sentence and left angrily. When he left, the door was slammed shut with a bang. I looked in the direction of the door. I didn't cry, and I didn't even have any emotions. When you really give up on someone, it doesn't matter what that person does anymore. 2 days later, I received a job application notice from a company. At the same time, I also received a call from Shirley. I calmly confirmed the time, address, matters needing attention and things to prepare with the company's HR, and then I called Shirley back. "Amaya, what do you mean?" she asked right away. The mistress was so aggressive and seemed to be in the right. "I don't know what you're talking about. That day in the hospital, didn't you promise me that you would divorce Marcos? Why did Marcos say that you didn't agree?" she asked me indignantly. "Are you sure I said such a thing?" I asked in return. You said Marcos was dirty. Shirley seemed unable to continue. I suddenly realized, oh, he is indeed dirty, but I don't have to deal with him, so it doesn't disgust me. The underlying meaning was that it was she who would be disgusted. Shirley was such a smart person that she must have understood it. Even if you don't get divorced, as long as you two have been separated for 2 years, the court can directly grant you a divorce. Shirley said angrily, then just wait for another 2 years. Anyway, I'm not in a hurry. Amaya. I hung up the phone directly. Who can't be disgusting to others? The next day, I put on a professional suit and went to the company for the job interview. It had only been a year since I left the workplace, but suddenly I felt a sense of strangeness. I forced myself to calm down and walked into the interview hall with my head held high. The man sitting in the middle. If I wasn't mistaken, he should be Shirley's elder brother Vincent, and he was also one of Marcos's childhood friends. 06 The interview didn't go very smoothly. The moment I walked in, I knew that there wasn't much hope. Fortunately, it wasn't necessary for me to enter this company. After all, the job market was so big and there were so many choices. However, unexpectedly, I received the employment notice from the HR. After careful consideration, I declined it. It was such an obvious trap, and I wasn't that stupid. Not long after I refused, a strange phone call came in. Hello. I'm Vincent. He was straightforward and a bit domineering. I wasn't too unfamiliar with Vincent, but he always gave the same feeling. Calm, ascetic, cold, noble, and not easy to get close to. If Marcos was the little son in the daytime, then Vincent was the first love in the dark. Really, both the brother and the sister were very dazzling. I wonder what Mr. Vincent wants from me. I want to know why Miss Amaya refused the employment offer from my company. I was suddenly at a loss for words. It was clearly a very obvious reason, but at this moment, I suddenly couldn't say it out, as if it wasn't proper. If Miss Amaya is worried because of Shirley, there's no need. I've always been able to distinguish between public and private affairs. Knowing my concerns clearly, yet still asking me. This person definitely didn't have good intentions. I don't think I performed very well today. Miss Amaya and I had several dealings when you were in Marcos's company. I'm very clear about your abilities. Those were things that happened 2 years ago. Could he still remember them? Miss Amaya, please report to the Human Resources Department tomorrow. Don't delay your career for the so-called man. It's not worth it. The decision you made to quit the workplace back then was really not worth it. 08 Marcos called out to Ariella, asking her not to make a big fuss in the police station. Then he learned about what had happened from the police and watched the video that I provided to the police. He clearly saw Ariella slap me in the face with all her strength. However, at that moment, he didn't even blink his eyes. He just wanted to solve the matter quickly and leave the police station early. Marcos took me aside. I know you're deliberately taking revenge on me, but don't involve my mother in our affairs. Now go and sign the settlement agreement, and I'll let bygones be bygones. I looked at Marcos and sneered coldly. What makes you think that I'll care about your letting bygones be bygones? Marcos's eyes paused slightly. Your mother should apologize to me, bow her head and admit her mistake in public, and then I'll let bygones be bygones. I made it clear, otherwise, I'll pursue this matter to the end. I turned around and left. Amaya. Marcos grabbed me, squeezing my hand tightly. You know that if you do this, you'll really ruin all the good feelings I had for you. I smiled again. After truly letting go of this relationship, I found that every word and sentence of Marcos was extremely shameless. How shameless do you have to be to think that your good feelings for me are important? Have you forgotten that you had an affair during our marriage and you're a disgusting existence yourself? Marcos was a bit embarrassed by my sarcasm. You'd better not regret it, Amaya. Marcos gritted his teeth. I ignored him, pushed his hand away forcefully, and dropped a sentence. I'll give you half an hour to persuade your mother. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. Marcos suppressed his anger and had to take his mother to a corner and started persuading her constantly. Anyway, Marcos was also a person with a certain status. If this kind of thing went to court and got spread out, it would also be a disgrace to him. In less than half an hour, Ariella walked up to me, looking very reluctant. I took out my mobile phone to record a video. Ariella's face changed drastically. The moment she had compromised, she got excited again. What are you doing? Put down your mobile phone, put it down. To prevent you from doing it again next time, of course, I should record it as evidence. If there's a next time, I'll spread this video. You've gone too far. Ariella was furious. Marcos's face also didn't look good. Amaya, don't push your luck. I used silence to show my determination. Ariella turned around and wanted to leave. Auntie. Shirley held her and said softly, I know you've been wronged in this matter, but now Amaya has the upper hand. If you don't apologize, you'll have to go to court, and the court will definitely order you to apologize. Don't delay the progress of Marcos and Amaya's divorce. Her voice was very low later, but I could still hear it clearly. Ariella gritted her teeth and walked up to me. picked up the apology letter I had written for her, and read it with a distorted expression. My name is Ariella. I'm here today to solemnly apologize to Amaya for my savage and shameful behavior. As Amaya's mother-in-law, I'm disrespectful to the elderly, snobbish, oppressing my daughter-in-law, destroying their relationship as husband and wife, not feeling ashamed but enjoying it. Today, I even hit my daughter-in-law, which has seriously affected the harmony of the family and caused extremely negative impacts on society. I'm a scum and a disgrace to the family and society, and I deeply repent for this evil deed. In the future, if I have any disrespectful words, deeds or actions towards Amaya again, I'm willing to accept any punishment. Ariella finished reading this in a breakdown, her eyes red with shame. However, all these are just the tip of the iceberg of what I have endured in front of Ariella day and night for the past 3 years. Now, I just let her experience the same feelings. Is it enough? Marcos asked me. His eyes were filled with anger. When his mother attacked me with all kinds of humiliating and vicious words before, he just casually told her to be quiet and don't disturb the neighbors, or found excuses to let her leave. He never said that his mother was wrong. Now that I'm using the same way, he can't accept it. It turns out that from beginning to end, I was just an outsider. Enough, I replied. I signed the settlement agreement with Ariella at the police station and walked out of the police station. As soon as we walked out, Marcos took my mobile phone and unlocked it directly. I forgot to change the password, which was still his birthday. He opened it smoothly, operated on my photos, and then told me firmly, Amaya, at this point, there's no room for redemption between us. I watched as Marcos emptied the photo album on my phone. He didn't just delete one photo. He deleted all the photos and videos in it. It was as if he had cleaned up all the feelings between us. He didn't know that my phone had an automatic backup function. Divorce immediately. As soon as Ariella walked out of the police station, she became arrogant again. I'm telling you, Marcos, don't give her a penny, or I'll die in front of you. Marcos glanced at me. He didn't immediately agree to his mother, but I saw his cold-bloodedness towards me in his eyes. I'll take you back, Marcos said to me. By the way, we can talk about the divorce. I didn't refuse. At this point, it was almost over. I had almost got what I wanted. I got into Marcos's car and sat in the back seat. Shirley, with the air of a mistress, naturally sat in the passenger seat. Ariella sat beside me, not hiding her disgust for me at all, and even cursed all the way back. When we got out of the car, Shirley and Ariella naturally followed behind Marcos. If you want a divorce, I'll only talk to you, I said to Marcos. What tricks do you want to play? Ariella screamed. I don't want to see anything that's an eyesore. Who are you calling an eyesore? Ariella cursed at me angrily. I looked at her, didn't say anything. Silence meant acquiescence. I'll beat you to death, you bitch. Ariella was enraged by me. Enough, Mom. Isn't today's lesson enough? Marcos stopped her. Ariella was still angry but finally held back. Marcos, then you have a good talk with Amaya. I'll call the driver and ask him to pick me and Auntie up. Okay. Marcos always looked at Shirley with tenderness in his eyes. Marcos followed me into the community. Marcos, if you still recognize me as your mother, don't give Amaya a penny. Ariella's fierce and threatening voice came from behind. I sneered. Some things were out of his control. Back home, we sat on the sofa, one on each side, distant and cold. Amaya, I didn't expect that our separation would come to this, Marcos said directly, with a tone of dislike. He disliked that I suddenly became disobedient. Forget it. I don't want to argue with you either, Marcos said impatiently. As if everything was my fault. He had an affair during the marriage, yet he thought he was in the right. At this point, there's no possibility of redemption between us. Here's the divorce agreement. Sign it if there's no problem, and then we'll go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to get divorced. Marcos took out the divorce agreement from his briefcase and gave it to me. The divorce agreement that had been prepared long ago had nothing to do with the conflict between me and his mother that happened today. Of course, I wasn't surprised, and I didn't even feel sad. I calmly read the divorce agreement. There was nothing but 200,000 yuan. You should remember that we had a property notarization when we got married. That means you can't get a penny of my family property, and I'm still giving you 200,000 yuan as compensation, letting bygones be bygones. Is this PUA? I calmly took out a list of all his assets from the coffee table cabinet. Marcos, one really shouldn't be too shameless. There will be retribution. Marcos's face darkened. Before he could speak, I said directly, according to the latest estimate, the market value of your company is 15 million yuan now, and your real estate and luxury cars under your name are worth about 12 million yuan. Excluding bank loans, your total assets are 20 million yuan. And you're giving me 200,000 yuan as compensation. Should I be extremely grateful? All my money belongs to me, Marcos said righteously. Giving it to you is a favor, and not giving it is my duty. Have you forgotten that I also worked in the company for 2.5 years? When the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, I accompanied you to solicit sponsorships one by one. I accompanied you to bring the company back to life, and even doubled its market value. Amaya, you should make it clear that without my platform, no matter how capable you are, you have no place to use your abilities. Without you, I could still develop the company to where it is today, but without me, you wouldn't even be able to get started. What qualifications do you have to calculate my assets? I smiled. I used to think that except for treating me badly in terms of emotions, Marcos didn't owe me anything in other aspects. I also always thought that Marcos was a responsible man. At least in the 3 years of our marriage, we had always treated each other with respect. It turns out that I was just being sentimental. Do you want a divorce? I didn't want to waste any more words. It was meaningless. It must be divorced. Here's my divorce agreement. I also gave Marcos the divorce agreement that I had prepared long ago. Marcos's face darkened slightly, and he rudely took it from my hand. Looking at the words on the divorce agreement, his face visibly turned ugly, and finally he became furious. He threw the divorce agreement in front of me. Amaya, how shameless are you to want to take half of my family property? Isn't it fair to divide equally when getting divorced? I asked in return. All these are mine. Why should I give them to you? I slowly took out several developed photos and put them in front of Marcos. Marcos's face became even darker. The photos showed him and Shirley in an unsightly bed scene. Where did you get these? Marcos asked through gritted teeth. Where did I get them? Of course, I hired a detective to take them. You set me up? Marcos was indignant and shocked. Probably he didn't expect that I would go this far. I was too obedient in front of him. So obedient that he could be unscrupulous. I didn't even expect that the detective could get such explicit photos in such a short time. Just returning the same for the same, I said indifferently. What do you mean by the same for the same? Marcos argued. At first, in order to stimulate your first love to marry me and afraid that I would take possession of your family property, you and your mother put on such a good show and tricked me into signing the prenuptial agreement. Now, I'm just taking back what belongs to me in the same way. It's very fair. Do you think that just because you took these photos, the court will recognize it? And will judge that I had an affair during the marriage and divide my property? Amaya, the law will only recognize our prenuptial agreement. If the court doesn't recognize it, do you think Shirley's family will recognize it? Will the public recognize it? I'll send these to Shirley's parents, and then to the employees of your company, or to the employees of the Vincent family group. Amaya. Marcos couldn't listen anymore. How insidious. I learned from you. When I entered the company, you taught me a lot of business means. It was euphemistically called business means. I advise you not to regret it, Marcos threatened me. I won't regret it. Perhaps the only thing I regret is that I didn't take more, but I can't take more. If I took more, it would backfire. Marcos is a calculating person, and he won't allow himself to suffer a big loss. But dividing equally, with Shirley's influence, he would reluctantly accept it. I and he were in a stalemate for a few minutes. Marcos picked up the signing pen beside him and signed his name on the divorce agreement I prepared. Then, without any delay, he took me straight to the Civil Affairs Bureau. The moment I got the divorce certificate, I suddenly felt relaxed. It was as if I had been reborn. Only then did I realize that this relationship really didn't exist anymore. Thinking of everything in the past, it seemed that only absurdity was left. Walking out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, Marcos threatened me in my ear, Amaya, you've worn out all my guilt towards you. Don't ever show up in front of me again in this life. After dropping this sentence, he walked away with big strides, impatient to see his first love. I watched his back without any reluctance. I went to the crowded street to take a taxi. During the rush hour after work, my DD ride was queued up to number 23, and I couldn't see any available taxis at all. Just when I was planning to take the subway, a Porsche stopped in front of me, and the car window was rolled down. Can I give you a ride? I looked at Vincent's angular side face, heard the urging horn sound from behind, and quickly got into the passenger seat. I was still holding the divorce certificate in my hand, which Vincent noticed at a glance. Divorced? He asked. I looked down at it and replied, oh. That's good, he commented. Yes, it's good. I've made room for your sister, I said self-mockingly. He seemed to turn his head and look at me, then changed the topic. Where do you live? Shangjing Community. Still living there? His eyebrows seemed to furrow a little. Pack your things. What I asked for from Marcos was basically immovable property. I didn't ask for the company, and he made up the difference with a bank transfer. But the only wedding room where we lived now, I didn't want it. Because on the night when I had a miscarriage, Marcos and Shirley spent the night there. They really didn't do anything. They were so drunk that they just fell asleep on the sofa. But it still made me feel disgusted. The car arrived at the community. Do you need help? No. You seem to be very defensive towards me, Vincent asked. Mr. Vincent, don't you think I should be? I asked in return. You should. Vincent was quite calm, and he didn't say another word and drove away. Not long after I moved, I got hired by a company and started working. When my parents learned that I got divorced, they were so angry that they almost killed me. I gave them a house and let them move to a big city. Then they shut up. On my way home from work, there was some traffic jam on the street. I drove with stops and starts. Lu Jia, who was my college classmate and also my best friend at that time, suddenly called me. After graduating from college, she went back to her hometown. Gradually, we had less contact and our relationship became much more distant. The sudden phone call really took me by surprise. Amaya, did you divorce Marcos? Lu Jia asked. Yes. You loved him so much. That was in the past. He's with Shirley now and invited classmates in the alumni group to his wedding banquet. I know. He also said in the alumni group that you married him back then just because you were greedy for his money and that he gave you 10 million when you divorced. Everyone said you made a big fortune. I couldn't help clenching the steering wheel tightly. Fortunately, Senior Vincent spoke up for you in the group, Lu Jia said. Do you know Senior Vincent? He was 2 grades above us. When we entered college, he was the president of the student union. Of course, I knew. He's Shirley's brother. However, it seemed that very few people at school knew the relationship between Vincent and Shirley. Shirley just came to our school to find Marcos at that time. What did he say? I asked. I was still curious. He said that as a man, if he was at fault first, he should leave the house empty-handed. It's a woman's kindness that she left him half of his property. Lu Jia was a bit excited. After he said that, everyone knew that Marcos had an affair. And Marcos didn't say a word in the group anymore. Senior Vincent really put him in his place beautifully. I had mixed feelings in my heart. Suddenly, I couldn't understand what Vincent's attitude was. But thinking that I wouldn't have any intersection with him, I didn't take it too seriously. As a result, when I parked my car and just got home, I was stunned when I saw the neighbor who was moving next door. Why was Vincent here? This community was nice, but with his worth, it didn't make sense. Had he gone bankrupt? Impossible. Although I felt a bit gloating. That would mean whether Shirley had nothing left either. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm just escaping from my family's urging me to get married, Vincent said frankly. Did this guy have X-ray vision or something? I smiled nervously and went into the house. After that, my contact with him became inexplicably more frequent. He would come to borrow all kinds of things from me just when I was about to have dinner. Things like oil, salt, soy sauce, vinegar, and tea. It could be said that he borrowed almost everything that could be borrowed. Your borrowing is going to empty my house, Mr. Vincent. What else do you want to borrow? I said straightforwardly. You. My heart skipped a beat. Think about it. I was so shocked that I was left speechless. I'm not in a hurry, Vincent said calmly. That night, I had insomnia. If I said that I couldn't feel Vincent's affection for me, I would be deceiving myself. But I couldn't figure out why he would like me. Considering his sister's relationship, it was impossible for him to like me. The next morning, I received a text message from Vincent. Have you thought about it? Didn't you say you weren't in a hurry? Yes, I'm not in a hurry. And then there was no more follow-up. I drove to work. Lu Jia seemed to like gossiping with me when I was driving. Since we got in touch last time, she had been contacting me quite frequently during this period. After all, women are born to love gossip. Amaya, have you heard? Marcos's company seems to be poorly managed and is facing bankruptcy. He has privately asked several alumni who are doing well now to borrow money. Why didn't he ask Shirley? I had the same question too. Logically, since they were about to get married, she should support him. Later, I found out that Shirley isn't the biological daughter of the Vincent family group at all. Her mother remarried a widower with her. To please him, her mother changed Shirley's surname. That means Shirley has no status in the Yu family and can't get much money. So, Vincent isn't Shirley's biological brother. It's said that Marcos is facing bankruptcy has something to do with Shirley. Shirley can't settle down at all. I heard that when she was abroad with no one to discipline her, she was a real playgirl. After being with Marcos, although she restrained herself a bit, she still couldn't calm down. She kept pestering Marcos to accompany her to travel around the world. Marcos wasn't at the company for days on end, and the company was almost emptied out. Do you think Marcos deserved it? He didn't want a virtuous wife like you but insisted on having a troublemaker to serve. I didn't say anything. It was because Marcos's affairs had nothing to do with me anymore. Finally, Lu Jia sighed and said, except for dressing up and looking stylish, Shirley isn't as good looking as you at all. At most, she's better at acting coquettishly than you. Marcos is really stupid. Right. Because at this moment, I saw a message pop up on my phone screen, from Marcos. Amaya, can we meet? I chose to ignore it. But when I got off work, I saw Marcos standing at the door. He seemed to have become much more haggard. If I said I regretted it, would you believe me? Marcos looked at me. Unexpectedly direct, and it was indeed in line with Marcos's style. He never wasted time when dealing with me. No. I really regret it. Marcos looked at me, with what seemed like sincerity in his eyes. I just found it funny. I always thought that I loved Shirley, but after really living under the same roof with her, I realized that the love for her had long ceased to be love but just an obsession. I was so desperate because I couldn't get her. During the time I was with her, I kept thinking of you frequently. Just one word, obsession, was used to cover up everything. Are you short of money? I felt so disgusted that I interrupted him. Yes, I'm short of money. But I'm not coming to you because of money. There seemed to be a bit of redness in Marcos's eyes. I started to miss the warm dinner when I got home, instead of the cold takeout every day. I started to miss your care and concern for me, instead of being ordered around by her every day. I started to miss working side by side with you in the company to overcome difficulties together, instead of being pestered by her to accompany her everywhere. Marcos's voice became a bit choked. He calmed down a bit before saying, "It turns out that some feelings can really influence you quietly, like the spring rain moistening things gently. You're just used to others being nice to you," I said indifferently. At first, I also thought so, Marcos retorted. So I cooperated with Shirley and tried to find the traces of loving her in her. But as time went by, my longing for you grew crazily until I became obsessed. Now, I can't control myself. I remained silent and didn't give him a response. Actually, there was really nothing to say. Amaya, give me another chance and let me love you well, Marcos said affectionately. Something that I didn't even dare to dream of before now made me feel extremely disgusted. Forget it, Marcos. Stop acting. Do you think I would be so shameless just for money? Yes, I hope you can come back and we can work hard together like 3 years ago, but what I care more about is that I love you. Whatever the reason is, I'll clearly reply to you that there's no turning back for us. I didn't have much more to say. I opened the door and was about to go in. Amaya. Marcos suddenly knelt on the ground. I was shocked. Marcos was very macho and he wouldn't kneel down easily. You can record a video as evidence. If I, Marcos, deceive you today and let you down in the future, I'll die a miserable death. Marcos swore a solemn oath. I pursed my lips slightly and looked at Marcos's determined face. There was a bit of the pleasure of revenge in my heart, but more of it was calm. I really seemed to have no interest in Marcos anymore. Amaya, forgive me, okay? Marcos called me gently. Just like in the past when he treated Shirley like this. No forgiveness, I said coldly. You don't deserve to be forgiven. Amaya, I've done so much. What else do you want me to do? I've knelt down for you. What else do you expect me to do? Marcos's eyes were red and there was excitement in his tone. Perhaps he still thought that as long as he admitted his mistake, I would go back to him. A belated affection is really cheaper than grass. Marcos, you slapped me and then gave me a candy. Should I be all smiles to you? But you know, from the moment you said that the miscarried child had no fate with us, it was over between us. Marcos looked at me while suppressing his emotions. Marcos, once feelings are missed, it's for a lifetime. Amaya. The moment I turned around, Marcos suddenly stood up from the ground and hugged me tightly. He held me so tightly, as if he was afraid of losing me. I don't want to miss you for a lifetime. Don't go. Please don't leave me. I can't live without you. We can have another child. Let me go. I'll never let go. Let go. Marcos held me even tighter. I couldn't even call the police. When I was extremely frustrated, suddenly a familiar voice came to my ear. Do you need help? My heart skipped a beat. As if I had suddenly found a savior, I quickly said, yes. Hearing the voice, Marcos instinctively let go of me. Without thinking, I rushed directly to Vincent's side, then gritted my teeth and held his hand, interlocking our fingers tightly. I saw the changes in Marcos's eyes from surprise to anger, then to suppression and finally to madness. Amaya. Marcos's voice was trembling. Yes, it's just what you saw. So do you think, facing a better man than you, I have any reason to go back to you? I questioned him, with sarcasm in my tone. Marcos's eyes were red. Perhaps it was anger, or perhaps it was sadness. He had his pride. Even now that he was at a low point in life, he wouldn't allow himself to be trampled on like this. Marcos walked past me. Pretend that I've never been here. Okay. Marcos paused for a moment. Amaya, you'd better not regret it. The one who will regret will never be her, but only you, Vincent said directly. Marcos left, angrily and resolutely. After he left, it was awkward between Vincent and me. I wanted to let go of the hand that was interlocked with his, but he held it tightly. My heartbeat involuntarily quickened. You just said that I'm better, Vincent asked me. Does that mean you've agreed? Was this guy's comprehension ability a bit too much like that of a robber? No. Vincent's eyes slowly dimmed. Aren't you not in a hurry? Let me think about it for 2 more days. I'm in a hurry. His sudden honesty made me a bit unable to handle it. I asked him, is it because of Marcos? There will be no possibility between me and him anymore. It has nothing to do with him. It's only about you, Vincent said with certainty. I was at a loss. I had never thought that just half a year after divorcing Marcos, I would have to start another relationship. I admit that I didn't sleep a wink last night and came to your door 20 times, Vincent said. I don't want to give you any more time. Right now, say yes to me. He was so forceful and overbearing. Suddenly, he bent down. I looked at him warily. I watched as his lips approached mine. I unconsciously clenched my fingers, looking at that handsome face. I acquiesced. Actually, I still had a lot of questions. For example, why did Vincent like me? For example, when did he start liking me? For example, why was his kiss so warm?